There are wounds that leave no blood, no bruises, no broken bones, yet they ache in silence, like a scream muffled beneath decades of pretending to be fine. You wake up, go through the motions, answer messages, meet deadlines, even laugh when expected, and still, something in you remains heavy, hollow, like a room inside your chest that no one's entered in years. It's hard to explain this kind of pain, because on the surface, nothing seems wrong. But if you've ever felt exhausted for no reason, unmotivated even after a good night's sleep, or caught in a cycle of numbness while everything around you looks normal, then you already know. Not all suffering is visible. Some of it lives beneath the skin, behind the mask, buried so deep that even you forget it's there. Your body remembers what your mind tries to forget. That tightness in your chest when you're alone, the random wave of sadness while doing something mundane, the inexplicable fatigue that no amount of coffee can fix. These are not glitches, they are signals. Your body is the last messenger of your soul, whispering truths the mind doesn't want to hear. And most of us have been trained to ignore these messages. We've been told that strength means pushing through, numbing out, staying busy. That to stop and feel would be weakness. But what if that very definition of strength is the trap? What if pretending to be unbreakable is the reason you feel so broken? Many people wear their okayness like armor. They smile just enough. They show up just enough. They become masters of emotional camouflage, but inside they're starving for authenticity. And that starvation turns into quiet despair. Carl Jung called this false self the persona, the version of you created to survive society, to gain approval, to avoid rejection. It's useful, yes, but when you confuse the persona with your truth, you begin to live a life that's not really yours. A performance, a projection, a prison. And the longer you play the role, the more the real you fades, until you're left wondering why you feel invisible, even in a crowded room. And here's the cruel irony. The world praises your mask. They applaud your control. They respect your detachment. So you keep it on. You become the strong one, the smart one, the successful one. But every mask is a muzzle. It hides not just your pain, but your power. You bleed emotionally, not because you're weak, but because your soul is suffocating under the weight of who you're pretending to be. The healing won't begin by fixing your schedule or optimizing your habits. It will begin the moment you admit, something in me is aching, and I'm ready to listen. The truth is simple but brutal. Until you face what you've buried, you'll never stop bleeding. You're not choosing half the things that shape your life. You think you are, but look closer. The people you're drawn to, the arguments you repeat, the emotional patterns that haunt you. They didn't start yesterday. They've been running in the background like a program too old to notice, like a song you've played so many times, you've forgotten you never chose the lyrics. Carl Jung said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Most of us are not living, we are reacting, trapped in cycles that began long before we understood what pain really was. You wonder why you sabotage relationships that feel safe, why you chase people who mirror old wounds, why when things are going well, a part of you still expects it all to fall apart. That isn't logic, that's conditioning. Your nervous system remembers betrayal, fear, abandonment, even when your conscious mind tries to move on. And so, when comfort arrives, you don't feel relief. You feel danger. You flinch at peace because chaos is familiar. You reject what feels nourishing Because your emotional autopilot doesn't trust anything. It wasn't trained to survive. This is not weakness. It's survival. Deep in the architecture of your brain, the limbic system, the emotional core, is constantly scanning for threat. The amygdala, like a soldier on edge, sends alarms before reason has a chance to intervene. That's why you lash out without understanding why. Why your chest tightens before your thoughts make sense. You don't have time to analyze pain when your body is wired to avoid it. So instead, you react, repeat, regret. But there's a moment before the reaction, a sliver of space where something deeper can happen. That space is where your power lives, the ability to pause, feel, and witness what the body is screaming before it becomes behavior. It's not easy to find that space, but you can train yourself to notice it. Start with silence. Sit, breathe, scan your body, not to fix it, but to hear it. Feel where the tension hides. Let it speak in its own language. The body carries truth the mind hasn't learned to translate yet. When you become conscious of what was once automatic, you reclaim choice. You become dangerous to every pattern that once defined you. And for the first time, you stop calling your pain destiny and start calling it what it really is, a signal that you're waking up. There's a story you've been told since childhood. Pain is something to be avoided, managed, numbed. But what if that story is wrong? What if your suffering isn't a punishment or a failure, but a signal? What if it's not a wall, but a doorway? In the quiet hours of the night, when distraction fades and discomfort rises, something ancient tries to speak through your sorrow. A direction, a demand, a deeper truth. Most ignore it. They reach for screens, substances, or smiles to push the pain away. But what we reject persists. What we avoid only grows stronger in the dark. You've been taught to fear the ache in your chest, the weight in your limbs, the tears that arrive uninvited. But maybe, just maybe, that's where your map is hidden. Pain isn't chaos. It's code. And when you learn to read it, it points precisely to what's missing, what's buried, what's begging to be known. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." The chaos isn't the enemy. It's the birthplace of the real you. The you that doesn't need to pretend, perform, or please. There's a reason myths and legends speak of the wounded warrior, the broken hero, the scarred king. They don't gain their strength despite the wound, but because of it. The pain becomes the initiation. The place of rupture becomes the place of revelation. In every psychological descent, there is a choice, to numb the wound or to learn its language. If you lean in, if you truly listen, you'll find that every heartbreak, every failure, every inner collapse was carrying a message you weren't ready to hear until now. Write down the things that hurt, not to wallow, but to witness. When you name the pain, you strip it of its shadow. You start to see it not as a threat, but as a guide, a compass pointing back to the parts of you you've denied, abandoned, or hidden. And as strange as it sounds, the more you honor your sorrow, the more strength it gives you. Because real strength is born where illusions die. And when you stop running from pain, you stop running from your own becoming. What you've been calling suffering might just be your soul asking for your attention. He smiles at the right moments. He listens more than he speaks. He says yes when everything in him is screaming no. He's the dependable one, the understanding one, the good guy. But under that polished exterior lives a slow death, a suffocation so subtle that not even he notices it at first. The world praises him for being agreeable, for being nice, but what they don't see is the quiet erosion of his soul, because in trying to be everything for everyone, he's forgotten who he is when no one's watching. The need to be good is often born from the fear of rejection. Somewhere in your past, maybe early on, you learned that being liked was safer than being real, that if you showed your anger, your desire, your darkness, you might be abandoned. And so, you hid it. You buried the parts of you that didn't fit the image. You smiled through resentment. You gave more than you had. You shrunk to be accepted. But the truth is this: you cannot be whole if you're only showing half of yourself. Carl Jung called it the shadow, those disowned parts of the psyche that you exile to win approval. And the longer you keep them locked away, the more they control you from beneath the surface. The rage you repress becomes passive aggression. The desire you deny turns into resentment. The voice you silence grows louder. In your body, in your fatigue, in your quiet bitterness. Wholeness isn't about being good. It's about being real. And real includes your flaws, your limits, your sacred no. Imagine a mirror. In one hand, you hold it up to your face. In the other, you wear a mask. The longer you stare, the more disconnected the reflection feels. The mask doesn't protect you. It divides you. It keeps you loved by others, but unloved by yourself. And eventually, that internal split becomes unbearable. You lose power. You lose clarity. You lose the fire in your gut that tells you who you really are. There will come a moment when you can't fake it anymore, when keeping the peace will cost you your inner war, when being the good guy will start to feel like being the dead man. And in that moment, if you dare to remove the mask, even for a second, you'll feel something terrifying and beautiful return, your truth, and with it, your power. You wake up tired. You go through the day in a fog. You collapse at night without knowing why you're so drained. But here's the truth. You're not exhausted because of how much you've done. You're exhausted because of what you haven't done. Because you've been starving your soul while feeding every obligation that keeps you comfortably numb. You answer every message, show up to every meeting, fulfill every role. But when was the last time you felt alive? Not just functional, alive, with purpose, with fire, with meaning. The modern world doesn't kill you with violence. It kills you with emptiness, slowly, quietly, by convincing you that checking off tasks is the same thing as living, that achievement will substitute for meaning, that likes and followers will replace connection. Viktor Frankl called it the existential vacuum, the silent epidemic of those who've lost a sense of why. You're not broken because you're tired. You're tired because your life has become disconnected from what moves you. Your actions lack alignment with your essence. There's a question you've been avoiding. What would I be doing if I weren't afraid? Not afraid of failure, but afraid of being seen. Afraid of leaving the comfort of approval, afraid of choosing the path that doesn't make sense to others, but makes your soul breathe again. Somewhere deep down, you know the answer, but it terrifies you because it demands honesty. It demands letting go of the image. It demands risking rejection for the sake of something real. Fatigue is not just physical. It's spiritual. It comes from betraying yourself in subtle, daily ways, from abandoning your mission to keep peace with people who don't even know who you really are. And there is no caffeine strong enough to fix that. Only truth can. Only courage. only returning to that silent voice inside that's been whispering all along. There's more to you than this. That whisper is your hunger, and it will not stop until you feed it what it's been craving all along: meaning. There's a subtle trap that captures many who walk the path of self-awareness. It's the illusion that understanding your wounds is the same thing as healing them. That if you can name the trauma, map the pattern, recite the theory, you've somehow transcended the pain. But knowledge is not integration. The wound doesn't close just because you can describe it. You can read every book on psychology, quote Jung and Nietzsche, study the stages of grief. But if your body hasn't released the pain, then your intellect is simply dressing the wound in language. You tell yourself you're growing because you've become fluent in the vocabulary of healing. But deep down you still feel numb, still feel triggered, still feel disconnected. That's because the mind is fast, but the body is ancient. It stores everything you couldn't express, everything you thought you survived, and it remembers. It remembers through tension in your neck, heaviness in your chest, tightness in your jaw. It remembers what you tried to think your way out of. But healing doesn't happen at the level of explanation. It happens at the level of experience, feeling, embodiment. Think of Trevor Resnick in The Machinist, a man wasting away, not because he doesn't understand what's wrong, but because he refuses to feel it. His body becomes the final protest, the skin and bone truth that the mind cannot hide forever. Your life may not be that extreme, but the principle is the same. When you suppress your emotional truth in favor of intellectual comfort, your body becomes the battleground, and eventually it will scream louder than your mind can speak. Healing starts in silence, not in analysis, but in presence, not in solving, but in surrender. Can you sit with your reflection without narrating, without judging, without running? Can you feel what your thoughts have tried to bypass? Because until you do, your pain will remain a theory you carry in your head instead of a truth you've released from your body. And nothing transforms until it's felt all the way through. It wasn't just the rejection that broke you. It was what you told yourself after, that you weren't enough, that something in you was unlovable, that if you had just been better, quieter, more perfect, they would have stayed. But rejection isn't always about you. Sometimes it's a mirror reflecting someone else's blindness. Sometimes it's life closing a door you didn't have the strength to shut. Yet the pain lingers, not because of the moment itself, but because of the story you began writing in its shadow. We carry abandonment like a scar, not because someone left, but because we made their absence mean something about our worth. You confuse being left with being unworthy. But ask yourself, was it really you that was rejected, or was it the mask you wore to be accepted? You mold yourself to fit in, adapt to be chosen, hide the parts of you that might scare them away, and then feel shattered when they walk away from the version you created. That's not true rejection. That's misalignment. Carl Jung spoke of projection, the unconscious habit of casting our unmet needs onto others, expecting them to fulfill what we haven't claimed within ourselves. And when they fail to meet those silent expectations, we call it betrayal. But it's not betrayal, it's blindness. We weren't seeing them. We were seeing a fantasy stitched from wounds. The deeper pain is not that they left. It's that we lost ourselves in the hope that they would stay. Marcus Aurelius once said, "If it is endurable, then endure it. Stop complaining." Stoicism isn't coldness, It's clarity. It strips away the drama we layer over reality. Rejection hurts, but the suffering multiplies when we turn it into a personal indictment. When we make a single moment into a lifelong sentence, trace the map of your rejections. Look at what they woke up in you, not the people, but the feelings. That's where the work begins, not in changing how others see you, but in changing how you translate what they do. Because once you stop making rejection a reflection of your worth, it becomes what it always was: redirection, a brutal kind of grace, a necessary, no-clearing space for a more honest yes. Wholeness is not perfection. It's not the polished version of you that has everything figured out, that never doubts, never aches, never breaks. Wholeness is truth. It's the raw, imperfect, evolving totality of who you are. Light and shadow, wound and wisdom, chaos and clarity. But to become whole, something must die. Not your essence, but the masks, the roles, the illusions you've carried like armor, the identities built on fear, performance, and survival. The version of you that kept you safe, but small. This death is not loud. It doesn't always come with a crisis. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in the quiet realization that you can no longer carry the weight of who you're pretending to be, that the life you built for approval is now a cage, and the keys are in your hand. But letting go means mourning a self you once believed was you. This is the price of clarity. Shedding the skin of who the world taught you to be so you can stand naked in your own becoming. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the journey of becoming who you truly are by confronting everything you are not. It's a rebirth that feels like loss, but it's not the loss of yourself, it's the loss of your illusion. And yes, it's painful, because you've suffered so long just to hold on to the image. But the pain of honesty is lighter than the pain of hiding. You've suffered enough, not to be saved, but to be awakened. Let the false roles burn. From those ashes, the real you will rise, not flawless, but whole. And that's more than enough.